Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today.
Yeah, we really are.
We're taking a subject that usually sits squarely in the realm of theology or, Sunday school classes, and we're dragging it into the stark light of anthropology and archaeology.
Which is always fun.
It is. We're talking about the Book of Mormon. But before you reach for the dial or close the app, let me be clear, this isn't a sermon.
No, and it isn't an attack piece either. We aren't here to debate faith with you. We're here to analyze a text.
Right. We aren't asking, is it true? In a religious sense, we're asking, what is it? Physically, historically, and textually. Because when we look at this stack of research, specifically a text titled The Lineage History of the Book of Mormon, we found an argument that completely upends the mental image most people have of this book.
It really does upend it. I think believers and critics alike tend to share the exact same mental map of the Book of Mormon. They picture this Cecil B. DeMille epic, millions of people spanning from New York to Chile, covering 2 continents and thousands of years of comprehensive history.
The hemispheric model.
Exactly, the hemispheric model. But the research we're diving into today asks a radical question. What if the book never claimed to be that? What if we've been reading a diary and expecting a census?
Yeah.
What if the text is actually a very specific politically driven document called a lineage history, confined to a space about the size of Florida?
And that is the mission today. We are going to test this lineage history theory against the hard sciences, linguistics, DNA, stratigraphy, to see if shrinking the map actually solves the biggest problems people have with the text. So let's start with a definition. To me, history is history. It's a textbook. It tells you what happened in 1776. What is a lineage history and how is it different?
Well, it's a massive distinction, and it's one that modern readers usually miss because we just don't write history this way anymore. A modern history tries to be objective and comprehensive. A lineage history is subjective. It's selective.
So it has an agenda.
It absolutely has an agenda. Its primary purpose isn't to inform you about the common people. It's to legitimize the ruling family.
So it's essentially a legal document, like I am the king and here is my proof.
Essentially, yes. The source material compares the Book of Mormon to the political descent documents of the Quichean peoples in highland Guatemala.
Okay.
When the Spanish arrived, they found these elaborate written records kept by priest scholars, and they weren't checking in on the farmers or the merchants. These documents had 3 jobs: prove the ruler's right to the throne, explain the social hierarchy, and foretell the future based on the past.
That actually sounds familiar. If you know the text, the Book of Mormon opens with Nephi essentially saying, I, Nephi, am making a record of my proceedings. It's very first person.
Exactly. And notice who gets left out. This is the key insight for this section. If you read the Book of Mormon as a lineage history, the silences stop being mistakes and start being features.
Give me an example of silence.
The people of Zarahemla.
Right.
The text admits there's this massive population that the Nephites discover. They are allegedly much more numerous than Nephi's group. But how much text do they actually get? Almost 0.
Because they aren't the ruling line.
Precisely. Unless they marry into Nephi's family, fight Nephi's family, or are ruled by Nephi's family, they simply don't matter to the record keepers. The source argues that this is why the book feels so small sometimes, despite the large population numbers it throws out. It's tunnel vision by design.
Speaking of small, let's talk geography. I mentioned Florida earlier. The source makes a really big deal about the physical scale of this history.
It does. If you strip away the assumptions and look only at travel times and distances mentioned in the text, like literally how long it takes to walk from city A to city B, the source argues the entire narrative likely took place in a territory only about 600 miles long and maybe 200 miles wide.
That is tiny. I mean, that's not a hemisphere. That's barely a state.
Yeah, it fits distinctly into Mesoamerica, specifically southern Mexico and Guatemala, and the timeline is just as compressed. The source points out that 62% of the entire Book of Mormon covers just one single 160-year period.
Wait, but the book covers 1,000 years, right? From roughly 600 BC to 400 AD.
It covers 1,000 years, but it doesn't care about most of them. 62% of the text focuses on the years 130 BC to AD 30. That is the crisis period where the ruling lineage was under severe threat. The other centuries, they get skipped over with just a few sentences, like, and 100 years passed away and there was peace.
So if you go into this looking for a comprehensive history of ancient America, you are guaranteed to be disappointed. It's like looking for a history of the United States, but only finding a biography of the Kennedy family.
That is a great analogy. And this brings us to the setting. If we are zooming in on Mesoamerica, that 600-mile strip, does the culture actually fit? because this is where the source introduces the concept of the shared picture.
I really like this part. It's the idea that the Book of Mormon acts as a bridge document. It has 1 foot in ancient Israel and 1 foot in the Maya jungle.
And for that bridge to hold up, you need concepts that exist in both places.
Okay, let's stress test this for the listeners. Give us the strongest examples. What is a specific cultural idea that appears in Jerusalem, in Mesoamerica, and in the book?
Let's look at the layered cosmos. In the modern world, we think of space as a vacuum. But in the ancient Near East, the universe was 3 layers: the heavens above, the earth in the middle, and the underworld, or the primal waters, below.
And Mesoamerica had that too.
Same structure. You have the 13 heavens, the earth, and Xibalba, the underworld. But here's the key connection. In both cultures, these layers are connected by physical touchpoints. Caves and mountains.
Mountains, I get. Like Moses on Sinai.
Right. You climb the mountain to speak to God. But in Mesoamerica, where you don't always have a mountain, you build one. That's what a pyramid is. A temple pyramid, like Tikal, is an artificial mountain designed to contact the divine layer. The source argues the Book of Mormon fits this worldview perfectly. Temples, mountains, and high places are the interface for revelation.
Okay, so that's the setting. What about the symbols? The source spends some time on the jaguar and the lion.
This is a classic example of cultural adaptation. In the Old Testament, the lion is the king of beasts. It represents power, but often the night sun, this raw ferocity. Now, there are no lions in Guatemala.
So a forger should have messed that up. They should have put lions in the jungle.
Or, if they were smart, they would just copy the Bible exactly. But the text does something very interesting. The imagery shifts. In Mesoamerica, the jaguar occupies that exact same symbolic slot. It is the night sun. It travels through the underworld. It is the absolute symbol of royal power. The source argues that the Book of Mormon text conceptually bridges these two beasts. The function of the animal remains the same, even if the species in the local context shifts.
It's like translating an idiom. If I say, it's raining cats and dogs, and you translate that literally into Spanish, it makes no sense to them. You have to swap it for the local equivalent.
Exactly. And then you have the Great Deep, the monster in the water.
This felt very Clash of the Titans to me.
It's one of the oldest myths in the world. In the Bible, God has to subdue the Leviathan, the dragon, and the primal waters to create order. In Maya mythology, the creator gods have to subdue the earth monster, often depicted as a crocodile or a turtle floating in the sea to create the land.
And the Book of Mormon uses that.
It uses that exact same chaos water imagery. The crossing of the deep is a conquering of chaos. The source argues that the text isn't just dropping random details. It's describing a world that makes perfect sense to a Jew from 600 BC and a Maya priest from 200 BC.
But this leads us to the biggest hurdle, the elephant in the room. Or maybe the tapir in the room, if we're keeping with the animal theme. The language.
The language puzzle, yes.
Yeah.
This is where many people get stuck.
Well, it's a completely valid question. If these people were Israelites, the text says they wrote in Reformed Egyptian. So where are the hieroglyphs? Why don't we walk into a ruin in Mexico and see Egyptian carved on the wall?
It's a major stumbling block for a lot of folks, but the source offers a very sophisticated explanation here, specifically about the difference between a script and a tongue.
Unpack that for us. Script versus tongue.
Okay, look at your phone. You see the number 5. What word do you say in your head?
5.
If a French speaker looks at that same symbol, what do they say? And a Swahili speaker says Tano. They are all saying different words, different tongues, but they are reading the exact same script. The symbol 5 conveys a concept, not a sound. This is called a logographic system.
And the source is arguing Reformed Egyptian worked like the number 5.
Exactly. The argument is that the Nephites weren't walking around speaking Egyptian. They were likely speaking Hebrew, or eventually a local dialect, but they used a logographic script Reformed Egyptian to record their history because it was denser. You could pack way more history into less space on the metal plates.
And does that align with how Mesoamericans actually wrote?
Perfectly. This is exactly how the Mayan glyph system works. You had different language groups, Chol-speaking people, Yucatec-speaking people, who couldn't necessarily talk to each other, but they could both read the dates and names on the same stela because the glyphs represented ideas, not just sounds.
That's incredibly convenient, but is there any hard evidence for this? Or is this just a nice theory?
There is some intriguing evidence mentioned in the source. It points to the work of David H. Kelly. Now, it's really important to note that Kelly was not a Mormon. He was a Harvard-educated archaeologist and an absolute giant in the field of Maya decipherment.
Okay, so a neutral party.
Very neutral. But he noticed a correlation between the Hebrew alphabet and the Maya calendar day names.
Walk us through that. How does that work?
So take the Maya day named Manic. The glyph for this day is a stylized hand. The word manic relates to grasping or hand.
Okay, I'm with you.
Now look at the Hebrew alphabet sequence. The corresponding letter in that exact sequence is kaf. Do you know what kaf means in Hebrew?
I do not.
It means palm of the hand.
Huh. So you have hand in the same spot in both lists.
And it's not just that one. Kelly found a sequence of these. He actually argued that there must have been some contact, some diffusion of a calendar system from the Near East to Mesoamerica around roughly 600 to 400 BC.
That is startling. Why isn't that on the front page of every archaeology journal?
Because diffusion is somewhat of a dirty word in archaeology, the idea that ancient cultures crossed oceans is generally rejected. But Kelly stuck to his guns on the data. And then there is glottochronology.
Sounds like a time travel movie.
It's basically carbon dating for words. Linguists can track how languages change over time, how Latin becomes French, for instance. Now, the source admits very clearly that there is no Hebrew language family in the Americas. You won't find a tribe speaking Biblical Hebrew.
Which is what critics usually point out right away.
Right. But researchers have found what they call faint echoes. There is some data suggesting Semitic influence in the vocabulary of Zapotec and Mixtec languages. It's buried under thousands of years of linguistic drift, but the source suggests it's there.
So we have a plausible script system, we have some weird calendar coincidences, but we still have a math problem. And this one bothers me the most, the population.
The demographic?
Yeah. In the text, very early on, like one generation after they land, the Lamanites are described as this massive multitude, huge armies. But they started with what? One family, Laman, Lemuel, and a few in-laws. How do you get an army out of 4 people in 30 years?
Biologically, you don't. It's impossible.
So the book is lying.
Or our assumption about the setting is wrong. This brings us to the empty continent myth. For a long time, readers assumed Lehi's family landed on a totally vacant continent. But the source argues, and science screams this, that the continent was not empty.
There were others.
Millions of others. If we look at the archaeological context for coastal Guatemala and El Salvador, the likely landing zone around 600 BC, it wasn't Manhattan, but it wasn't a desert. There were rural populations, pottery, established villages.
So Lehi's family lands, and they aren't Robinson Crusoe. They are immigrants moving into a neighborhood.
Exactly. And this completely redefines what a Lamanite is. If Lehi's group lands and immediately starts interacting with locals, marrying, trading, fighting, then Lamanite stops being a DNA test.
It becomes a political label.
Correct. The source argues that Lamanite became the catch-all term for outsider. If you weren't part of the specific Nephite covenant or ruling structure, you were a Lamanite. This includes the thousands of local indigenous people who got absorbed into these factions.
That solves the math problem instantly. The armies aren't Laman's great-grandkids. They are the local armies that Laman took over.
And we see this happen in history. The source uses the analogy of the Popol Vuh again. We know that Nahua speakers' ancestors of the Aztecs invaded Guatemala anciently. They were a small group of elite warriors. They conquered the much larger Maya population.
And what happened to their genes?
They vanished. They were swallowed up. Within a few generations, their DNA was diluted into the larger pool. Their language was completely replaced by Maya, but their political claim to rule remained. The history stayed, but the biology dissolved.
So the Nephites are the drop of oil, and the indigenous population is the ocean.
That is the most scientifically plausible model. And it explains why we don't find Israelite DNA dominating the Americas. We shouldn't expect to. They were swamped.
This really changes the race conversation, too. Because the text, and let's be honest, the art we all saw growing up depicts this as a black and white issue. Literally, Nephites are white, Lamanites are dark. But if they're all mixing with the same indigenous locals...
The source tackles this head-on. It argues we need to stop reading darkness and whiteness as 19th century racial categories and start reading them as ancient Near Eastern literary tropes.
A trope, like a metaphor.
Look at the Sumerians in ancient Mesopotamia. They were urban city dwellers. They wrote about the Amorites, who were actually their genetic relatives, but they described them as dark, savage, and living in tents.
So dark meant redneck or uncivilized.
Essentially, it was a cultural slur. It marked someone as an outsider to the city order. The source argues that when the Nephites describe the Lamanites, they were using this city versus wilderness language. It's about clothing, behavior, and religious status, not melanin.
But is there any physical evidence of different people mixing? The source mentioned skulls.
Andrzej Wiercinski. He was a Polish anthropologist, again, non-LDS, who analyzed hundreds of ancient Mesoamerican skulls.
That sounds like a grim job. What did he find?
He found incredible diversity. While the population was predominantly Mongoloid, which is the standard classification for Native Americans, he found a significant cluster of what he called Caucasoid and specifically Armenoid traits.
Armenoid is in Armenia, the Near East.
Yes, it's a skull shape characterized by a high bridge and a prominent nose. Wiercinski wasn't trying to prove the Book of Mormon, but he concluded that ancient Mexico wasn't biologically sealed off. There were foreign elements in the mix.
So science tells us the population was complex, the text tells us it was political, and the geography tells us it was local.
And the dating tells us it fits.
Oh, we almost skipped the dating. Does the timeline actually work?
It really does. The source relies on stratigraphy, reading the layers of dirt like a stack of books, and carbon-14 dating. The rise and fall of the pre-classic Maya civilization aligns surprisingly well with the rise and fall of the Nephite and Lamanite periods. The collapse of the pre-classic era matches the massive destruction and societal shift recorded around the time of Christ in the book.
So let's try to pull this entire puzzle together for you guys. Because we've covered a lot of ground today, from jaguar gods to skull shapes.
It is a lot of information to process.
If we hold on to the old Sunday school map, the entire hemisphere, empty continent, literal white versus the water, the science just destroys it. It doesn't work.
It falls apart immediately under scrutiny.
But if we pivot, if we look at this as a lineage history, a record of a specific small elite family living in a 600-mile stretch of Mesoamerica, struggling to maintain their identity while being absorbed by a massive indigenous population,
then the conflicts don't necessarily disappear, but they change shape. They become plausible. The book stops being a biological history of the American Indian and becomes a political history of a specific religious movement.
it makes the story feel more fragile in a way. It's not a story of conquest, it's a story of survival.
And ultimately, extinction.
Right, because they lose.
They lose. The Nephite lineage is wiped out. And this leads to the final, somewhat provocative thought the source leaves us with.
Which is what?
Who are the Lamanites at the very end of the book?
Well, in this model, they are everyone left. The locals, the defectors, the conquerors, the survivors.
Exactly. They are the people of the land. And the text says that the land is consecrated to anyone who is brought there by the Lord and keeps the covenant.
Jew and Gentile.
So if Lamanite became a political status or even a covenant status referring to the remnant that survived, then maybe this history isn't actually about the preservation of a bloodline.
What do you mean?
Maybe it's about adoption. If the Lamanites absorbed the Nephites and then absorbed others, and the promises apply to them, then the history is really asking us to redefine family. Is family defined by your DNA? Or is it defined by your willingness to be adopted into the story?
That's a heavy thought for you to take with you. The idea that the history continues not through ancestors, but through newcomers.
It definitely changes how you read the last few chapters. It's not just a tragedy, it's a handing of the baton.
Well, that is certainly something for you to mull over. We hope this deep dive helped you redraw the map a little bit. It's got complex text, and sometimes shrinking the picture helps you see the details more clearly.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.